Martian home shield. And yeah, we spoke German where I lived. And every German colony has a home shield. That's what they call their militias. And every colony, every planet, every moon, in the solar system, every planetoid big enough has a base except Venus and Saturn. Venus is owned by the Jahami. They don't want us there. Saturn is owned by the Guardians. They are the military police of the galaxy. They don't want us there. But every place else, we're all over the place. Now, some of them are German, some of them are American, some of them are mixtures. Mars is now a mixture. When I was first there, it was just Germans. So, it's a real military. It's a planetary defense system. It's under the supervision of Nachtwaffen, which is the military of the German breakaway civilization. And it's a subset of the Draco Empire. The various American and NATO troops that operate on Mars are under the command of the Heimschild. Weapons and equipment are provided by the German military, Nachtwaffen, and they're usually older versions, just like our National Guard uses Army surplus. This is a map of Mars. I'm sorry I couldn't get the font more readable. Let me see if I can get... No. I don't know exactly where the base was. I think that it was Olympus Mons, which is the big mountain on the left side. I'm pretty sure that's where Eris Prima was, because I keep being attracted to that part of the map. But later on, when I flew for the militia, when I flew as a fighter pilot, I did a Northern Hemisphere, what would be Tropic of Capricorn on Earth. So I was like halfway between the equator and the North Pole. That's where I usually operated. And my job was to look for raptor nests and to find dead bodies. Ghoul duty, Ghoul, because we had technology that could bring you back from the dead. So we would go find the bodies, and we would bring the bodies back and dump them in the regen tank, and whatever came out, came out. If it had memory, awesome, we didn't have to train it. If it didn't have memory, we had to treat it like a child and start over. And about half of what we brought back were native Mars humans. The technology that we used was based on a form of black goo, which is an AI, and we took the sentience out of it and turned it back into a tool. And it was stored in a tank, and there was a computer on the outside, and you could set it for an age and a weight, and you could literally bring someone back from the dead if they had only been dead for 4 months or less. The shorter time they were dead, the more memory they would have. Yeah, it's mind-boggling, the technologies that humans have in space. Now, the Germans use that technology. The Americans use the medbed technology, and it's based on holographics. And I don't understand how it works, but I do know that with the German technology, if you put a clone body in it, you get a mindless creature back because they grow the clones so fast they don't have a mind. It's not that they're, if they had been allowed to mature at a reasonable rate, they would be a person just like you would. But they grow them in under 24 hours and the mind can't mature in that length of time. So you have an infant mind in an adult body, and the Germans really didn't want to deal with that, so they don't use clones. So anytime someone talks about that they were in Nachtwaffen, they were in their real body, the one they were born in here. I mean, all the different factions out there have their own technologies for different reasons. So Americans use clone bodies. The Germans use your natural body you were born in. Okay, the colony of Aries Prima, or Aries Prime in English, as I knew it. I came through the New York Jump Gate in 1964. We were, Langley's class of 64 started off with 1,000 kids, and there were 20 of us that made it to Mars. In 5 years, they killed off the rest. These are kids who were kidnapped and never came home. So we were turned over to the Marsische Heimschild as assets. We were not considered people, we were property. The first thing they did was put us in Schule. We had no education at Langley other than our weaponization, and we could not read or write in any language. Most of us sort of almost spoke English, but they spoke Schwabian German, and so does Nachtwaffen. So that's what we were taught. It's not standard German, and it's made it a little bit interesting trying to figure out what my memories were. So, Aries Prima was founded by the Germans. They were joined by the folks in the 60s from the brain drain. And so there were 3 major language groups there: German, English, and Russian. The German part of the colony was Teutonic. Everybody wants to say they were Nazis, but they're not. They're tribal, warlike, not peaceful, but they're not racist either. They're very different from here. But yeah, they're people. And the children were encouraged to be aggressive. And the colonist kids had parents to take up for them when they got into trouble, and we from Langley didn't, so we ended up fighting a lot. And because we had psi abilities that had been weaponized, we were kind of feared. I was one of the ones most feared. I was not allowed into the civilian colony. So after you heard what Joseph had to say about my abilities, that probably makes sense. Schule was based on where you functioned, not your age. And the class was about 25 kids, and we ranged from 8 to 12, and it was all of us were learning to speak German and read and write. And we had to learn basic cultural stuff, and it was a bit of a challenge for most of us. And school was taught Prussian style. You had a desk, you had a chalkboard and chalk and a cloth to erase it with, and everything was said out loud. And if you said it wrong, you got your finger slapped with a ruler. You learned real quick to say it right. We had about 5 hours a day in school, and then afterwards we would work in the colony gardens growing food. Everybody earned their keep. Nobody got a free ride. We wore uniforms that had to look neat. Considering that at Langley, I had worn white cotton pajamas and had my head shaved, learning to keep a uniform clean, learning to comb my hair, learning to look, I guess the proper term would be civilized, was a real challenge. I was already 9 years old. Most kids learn that stuff by the time they're 5 or 6. I had been kept in a cell that was basically 6 foot by 4 foot for 5 years, basically in solitary confinement. And suddenly I was in a barracks with 11 other kids. I had not even had a name at Langley. I was number 7. And now I was expected to answer to my birth name of Penelope. It was a major adjustment. We learned the basics, German immersion, reading and writing, literature once we could read, ET literature translated. Math was base 60, not base 10. ET science was a lot easier in base 60. And biology included what was known about the ETs we were expected to interact with. By the time I was 14, I had a class on ETs and how best to kill them. That's information still tucked in the back of my head. The fastest way to kill a Draco, for instance. There are times that that's important information. Physics there is a cross of electric universe and quantum mechanics. There's a few other ET things that are thrown in, but that's the core of it. Relativity had errors that they were very happy to point out. This was what the Shula uniforms looked like. There were white shirts, gentle skirts for girls, pants for boys, a cardigan with pockets. Girls had an orange bow tie, and boys had the long tie with the Windsor knot, also orange. And we had these ugly, ugly clodhopper shoes. In fact, there's one man who believed me because he works in Austria making those clodhopper shoes. And he had no idea where they were all going because his factory was just going crazy making them. They're going to Mars. Okay, this is one time I was actually really a hero. We'd been on Mars for a little over a year Earth time, so it wasn't quite a year Mars time. When one day the Raptors found a way into the colony and into the Shula cafeteria. I still don't remember quite how they did it. It's just there was a big hole in the wall. But somehow they did. The battle was short and bloody, with the Terrans caught unarmed and unprepared. And in my terror, my psi abilities kicked in, and I formed a force field around a group of us kids. And the Raptors couldn't get through it. And there would be sparks flying off it where they were raking their claws across it. And then the Germans used time travel and came back and stopped the attack and rescued all of us. And when my memories were activated, this was the first memory that was on top because I could smell everybody's blood. The kids, the adults, the raptors. Raptor blood smells like copper. It doesn't smell like ours. And for a little while, I was actually a hero because I had saved some of the kids. And this is art that I had done by Mark Halassi. And no matter how I described him, that's how he thought the raptors looked. He also thinks all German children are blonde. I love Mark. He's a great guy. But once he gets an idea in his head, you can't change it with a baseball bat. Each planetary colony has its own defense militia. And there are border issues and pride issues. The Germans have this thing, they use a carrot and a stick. If you perform well, if you are competitive and win, you get a reward. If you consistently lose, you get the stick. And there are competitions between, well, at that time it was between Mars and Ceres because they're the two oldest solar system colonies. So then all the probes that were sent to Mars were all shot down as unauthorized incursions, and until NASA finally decided to contact the militia and get permission. And since then, nothing's been shot down. How amazing is that? It's kind of like proof that somebody knows they're there. So basic equipment. During the Mars War, which the Germans started, we had fighter planes that resembled F-15s, but with plasma engines instead of jets. There's not quite enough atmospheric pressure to really run a jet on Mars. So they were later replaced with planes similar to shuttles, but they had weapons on them and missiles of various strengths, laser cannons, strategic nukes. And pilots were chipped to be in contact with the ship's computer. Mine was right behind my left ear and looked like a Bluetooth. You know, one of the practicalities that I keep wondering about is how I washed behind that ear. You know, I know that when we showered, it was with sound technology. So all I can figure is that the sound waves got through there and cleaned it anyway. But I was just sort of, that's one of the things that has baffled me. And it was not a one-way connection. The ship knew when I was in trouble and would respond. If I panicked, it would send for help. If I died, it would send for help, because I've been brought back from the dead more times than I care to think about. The one on the left is an F-15 from Earth, and that's a Lockheed Martin photograph from online. All of the art that's not credited came from the internet. So I'm not doing any photos that are actually from there. The one on the left is the first plane that I flew. The one on the right is the one okay. The one on the right is the one that was there when I got sent out. Basic hand weapons, projectile weapons, railguns, energy weapons, laser rifles, and blades. Yes, guys, lightsabers are real. They're just not as long as they show on Star Wars. They're only about this long. And yes, they're red. Earth-type firearms are dangerous on ships because they blow a hole in the in the wall. And if you really want to terrorize an ET, the noise of them really does a great job because they're not used to that. Laser rifles, on the other hand, don't make the noise. They're smaller than a rifle, they're bigger than a handgun, and because of the power pack, you can use them over and over and over and over. They almost never run out of weaponry. And there's a version called a dew that came from the tall whites. The dew has a version that's made with iodine crystals that when you're hit with that, it causes internal bleeding that cannot be stopped by human medicine. So if you're hit with that, you will slowly bleed to death. This is kind of how they dress on Mars, except that most of them it's variations of browns and oranges. It's not so much grays. It blends in with the dirt better. And I do give credit to the artists. This one, I don't know who did it, but whenever you have the chips, this is what you see, is the readout. Someone looking at you won't see that. So it's a visual, but it's brain oriented. It's not something that appears, but it gives you a readout for everything you need. It gives you air temperature. It gives you wind speed. It gives you a basic identification of what you're looking at, what kind of ET it is, or which human, and if it's a human, what faction they're with, and it will come up in red if it's someone who's an opposing faction, so that you know this is someone that's potentially dangerous. And if you're at war on that planet, you are expected to kill that person. So, and everybody out there has chips. Everybody. It's basic equipment. It's survival equipment. You have to know who you're dealing with at all times. And I think she's wearing a smart suit. Cyborgs are a very real part of the military on Mars. What they are is a robot body with part of a human brain installed. And they are made in such a way where you think they're totally robot, but they're not. There's a person in there. And some of those robots are warranted for 600 years. So you have people trapped in robot bodies for the next 600 years. The mercenary companies are the worst to do this, Kruger and Monarch, but Planetary Corporations is who actually builds them. And they have factories on Mars, Mercury, and Pluto. And these are not volunteers. These are usually war refugees, homeless people, people in hospitals dying of cancer, who are told, oh, we can make you stop hurting. So they're being lied to. Everybody on Earth who disappears is potentially a cyborg now. There's more art. They come in various forms. Some of them look more human than others, depending on what job they're supposed to have. And yeah, some of them actually show the brain in there. The original colonies and bases were all in Draco Empire territories. Every square inch of space already belongs to somebody else. property rights are not just an Earth thing. If you want to go out into space and you want to have a colony, you have to rent that from somebody, or you have to take it in warfare. And that's why the Germans started the war on Mars, is because the spaces that were best for humans were not where we were allowed to go because of our rental agreements. So they used tactical nukes to clear the sites, and that started the war with the raptors and the mantids. Okay, the sentient races of Mars. Terrans started off with the Germans, and then the other groups joined them. The Draco Empire, which is made up of 7 separate races of reptilians who cannot interbreed. They are not the same people. The Zetas, who tell me that they are a human race damaged by a nuclear radiation war on their home world. The Mars native humans, who are survivors of when we last went out into space. And the ones there basically look like Apache. They're taller than we are because Mars has less gravity. And they have an orange tint to their skin. And we think it's diet related, but nobody knows exactly what they're eating. The Mars native raptors, they look just like Jurassic Park, but with human type arms, and they still have the 6-inch claws that are sharp as razor blades. And if they get mad at you, they go and gut you with a single stroke. The mantids. Now we call them mantids here. There we call them bugs. We also call the raptors lizzies because humans are humans and we're rude to everybody. So the mantids there are actually more like ants, except they don't have that skinny little part between their thorax and abdomen that they do here. So yeah, we're going to talk about each of them. We already talked about the Germans being Teutonic. They're not racist like the Nazis were. They do have a preference for people of Aryan descent, but they're not mean to anybody else. They're not trying to kill anybody like they pulled here because they're not Nazis. I've only interacted with 3 of the Draco races, so I really can't describe the other 4. So I'm going to skip them. The Draco don't like to wear clothes because it chafes their scales. So they run around pretty much naked unless they have to wear protective gear for work. And they're all very telepathic. Most of the problems that we have with Draco are because they have a really high energy field and the volume is set too high for our nervous system and it fries us. Now, some of us were genetically engineered to live among them. And I'm one of them. So I can sit there beside them all day and not have a problem. But someone just pick someone out of the audience and put them next to a Draco, and then the Draco's not doing a thing wrong. You'll be dead in a half an hour just because their energy field is that intense. It's like set way too high for us. So they figured that out, and for the most part, they don't interact with us unless they know we've been modified to do so. The royals. The Draco are ruled by a queen, her mother, and her sisters. Her consort is called king, but she rules. honor is their most important quality. Like we give lip service to love, they actually mean it about honor, but their idea of honor is a little different from ours. And it matters probably more to them than power. And they come in different colors, but they're mostly white. They have wings, sometimes tails. They're starting to lose the wings and the tails, so they're not always big enough to lift them. And they are descended from actual dragons, and those people are called Siakar. They are not the same species, no matter what a certain popular speaker says. This is the best drawing I could find online of what a Draco Royal looks like. Now, most of them are white. This particular one is drawn in green. They're also sometimes red or brown. I know one king was bright red. And most people try to draw them with an almost human face, and they don't. They have a snout like this shows. And you'll notice that they walk on their toes. They don't put their foot down flat. So they have their heel up in the air. And that shortens the thigh and tightens up their calf muscles. And yes, they do have claws, and they do have spikes, and they do have horns. Sometimes they will have feathers in between the horns, and it'll be like almost like peacock feathers, just strips of them down the middle of their back like a horse's mane. The second race of Draco that's on Mars, and are probably the most common, they call them the warriors because that's their function. I don't know their racial name. And they would probably be offended at me calling them Draco warriors. They're not as tall as the royals. They're usually brown, but sometimes they're green. They do not have wings. They're a turtle race, and most of them still have shells. They're every bit as telepathic as the royals. When I did my 6 months at Montauk, there was a Draco warrior there, and he would be sent for me when I would run away. This is as close as I could find to what they look like, and this artist had the face exactly right. That's what they look like. I saw this and I just, oh my. And they are not even from the same planet as the alphas. So these are a separate species. The third race are the workers, and they're about 7 feet tall, so they're just a little bigger than us. They're usually green, and they look like Dino from the Flintstones. They're smarter than Terrans, but not by a lot. They get really offended when they have to work with us because they think they're superior to us. They're not quite as telepathic as the other races, and they're descended from an upright lizard. They basically are blue collar. They go to work, they go home, they spend time with their family, they drink their version of beer, but don't underestimate them. In an armed fight, they'll win. And that's more or less what they look like. I think this is actually another species, but this is pretty close to what they look like. I think their scales are a little smaller. And that's the link to the website. The Germans were allied with the Draco long before they came to Mars in the 50s. And when the Mars jump gate became operational in 64, the colony's Ares Prima was already viable underground on Draco territory. The Draco oversee all human Terran activity on Mars. Out there, we are called Terran, because Earth is called Terra. So even if you weren't born here, you're a Terran. The Draco get mad when we violate their treaties because that dishonors them. They gave their word, certain behaviors would take place, and when we do something else, it reflects badly on them. And I have seen, okay, you all heard about Randy Kramer's Battle of the Blender? Anybody not hear about that? Okay. Randy Kramer talks about this horrific battle where his group was sent to get this, oh goody. Yeah. Randy's group was sent to get this thing, and it was an artifact of some kind, and the local mantids did not wish to part with it. And so they set up a trap, and they basically just completely killed off an entire battalion of Space Marines. Okay. They were decimated completely. And it was my commander who had ordered it. And he had a Draco boss who came in one day and chewed him out over it and screamed at him for over 20 minutes. And, whoops. And it disconnected. And the Draco boss showed up and gutted my commander, and we put him in region as soon as the Draco left. We did a lot of that. We'd have dead people, we'd just dump them in region. You come out of region with the memory of how you ended up there. So this was the last one, I think. The worker cast are from the third planet, a third planet in Draconis. Draconis has 7 planets. So, yeah, we did that one. The Zetas on Mars. Zetas are from Zeta Reticuli. There are 5 planets there. Each one has its own gray race. I will be honest, I cannot tell the difference in them. I know they're separate species. I know they don't like each other. I know they operate separately, but I cannot tell a visual difference from them. One of them is based on mushroom technology. Their body chemistry is based on mushrooms, and they stink to high heaven. And if you wash them down with cleansers, it makes them drunk. And this is the basic Zeta. It's not real flattering. Most humans really dislike being around Zetas because they smell bad. That's because they apply their food to their skin. They absorb it through their skin. Then they poop through their skin, and everything gets mixed together, and it just stinks. But that's the way their bodies operate, so we're not going to complain too loudly. But that's how we found out cleaning products make them drunk. So, yeah, I mentioned that. The first time I saw a Zeta drink Drano, I was completely mortified. Okay, one of my jobs was to retrieve human remains, and we could not tell the difference between Mars native humans and Terrans. And since the raptors like to eat the Mars native humans, we found a lot of them. But they're an innocent, spiritual, peaceful people who will abandon an area rather than fight. And they're a little taller than us. They run 6.5 to 7 feet tall. They're thinner than us. They're medium brown with an orange tint to it. And their language is more like Sumerian than any other Earth language. And they wear loose, gauze-like fabrics dyed blue or black. And no, we don't have any idea what the fabric is or what they use to color it with. We know very little about their culture because if we move into their area, they will up and leave. They want nothing to do with us. And this is art I had done. And Mark Halassi had listened to Andy Bajago, who described them as ugly, and so this is how he drew them. They're just people like we are. So, and Mark had problems with the concept that the women go topless. That apparently embarrassed him terribly. So, they honor the Divine Mother by keeping their breasts exposed. And that's honoring that that's the source of mother's milk. And that got him into a lot of trouble with Terran men from both the German and the American militaries on Mars, which is part of the reason they will leave an area. This is a NASA photo that actually shows one of their women. This was the best resolution I could get for it. But yeah, that's one of the Mars natives. This is another one of the Mars natives. This one I believe to be male. And another version of one of them with the arm at that position. It's hard to tell if it's a man or a woman. The Mars native raptors have the same ancestors as the underground raptors that Lacerta was part of. They range from 7 to 9 feet tall. They look like the raptors from Jurassic Park with more human-like arms. They're deeply intelligent, telepathic, and carnivorous. And they like to eat humans. And in an unarmed fight with a Terran, they will win every time. Per Randy Kramer, the Space Marines are using them for target practice. They used to be a spacefaring race, and they were on several worlds, Earth, Mars, probably Ceres, and others, until the last space war about 20,000 years ago. They fell in decline. They're in their dark age, and they were pushed back into tribal hunter-gatherer mode by the attacks of the Germans. They are an advanced race in a dark age. They are not a primitive one. And the understanding that the Terrans have is that when we go through our dark age, that we go through cyclically, that they will eat us alive at that point. So they are deliberately exterminating them before then. So this is a genocide going on. And that's a more accurate picture of them, although they do tend to have, sometimes they have a single decorative feather or 3 or 4 down their back of their head and neck. So yeah, they come in greens and browns. Greens in the northern hemisphere and browns in the southern. It's just coloring differences. They're really the same folks. This is a NASA picture, and I gave the Sol number. And this is a dead or sleeping raptor. I'm assuming the way its snout is formed that it's dead. So there is actual visual proof that these creatures exist. The weather on Mars, there's sometimes rain, sometimes snow, but it's really light and mostly at the poles. It's usually in the winter, but even in the summer, it's cold enough for everything to freeze. So the major weather events are sandstorms. And they're like those desert sandstorms where it's like a wall of sand comes at you. And they circle the planet. They create enough static electricity that the lightning bounces off Phobos. These are, if you are on the surface and unprotected, these storms will destroy your electronics. So if we see one coming, we open up one of the emergency bases and we take everything underground. So that's why you're not seeing bases on Mars, on Google Mars, is because everything's underground. And that's a picture of cloud cover on Mars, and it's from NASA. Blueberries are the bits of iron that are all over Mars. They're evidence of the lightning strikes that have pulled the iron out of the dirt. And most of them are under 5 centimeters or about 2 inches. They occasionally get a lot bigger than that. But the dirt that there is dirt colored, and they colored these blue so that you could see them, but they're actually raw iron. So, and they're all over the place. You could go through and just scoop them up. And this is more natural colors. And there's a website, thunderbolts.info, that has a lot of information about them. I'm going to skip over a lot of that. NASA says the sky on Mars is pink. It's actually a very light blue. Most of the time when the sandstorms come, it can be pink or orange or just dirt color. This is a Martian sunset. It's kind of a blue lavender. There are trees around the South Pole, and they show up on NASA photos. I mean, what else are those? Trees? And more trees. And this is the last slide I've got. So, thank you guys for being here.
We love you. Did you guys enjoy?
Earth, a 4.5 billion year old planet, still evolving.
Hey guys, so man, listen, I'm not here to convince you. That's for you. But man, my hunger for knowledge is never ending, and it's aggressive, regardless of how far out that knowledge may seem to be to some people. But I will leave by saying this. All these people ain't lying, okay? It's really that simple. I appreciate each and every one of you that came through. Until next time. Shout out to the Leak You community. Please join us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music.
Please hit the like. Thank you.
It looks like you lost another